Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I've got a very, very special guest for you all today. Richard Falk is joining us on today's episode to talk about everything that is going on in Gaza, everything happening with Israel and Trump. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm not really sure what to make of all of it. But I'll say, even though I don't trust any politician, I'm hopeful that by the grace of God, there will be a ceasefire for the people of Gaza. As for Mr. Falk, if you don't know, which I'm sure most of you do know, is an American professor emeritus of international law at Princeton University, an author of over 20 books, former UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian human rights from 2008 to 2014. Mr. Falk, thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing?
Pretty good. Good to be your guest. Look forward to our conversation.
Great. What do you make about this Trump Middle Eastern tour? He's skipping Israel, and he's taking a lot of money, a lot of gifts from these Gulf nations. Is this surprising to you?
Nothing that President Trump does surprises me. Or put it another way, everything he does surprises me. He's very unpredictable, and in a fragile world order, somewhat dangerous. At the same time, because he doesn't have fixed principles or predictable frameworks of action, he can possibly reach out in ways that more conventional political leaders refrain from doing. And he's less a creature of what is often called the deep state, that is the unelected bureaucracy that constrains elected leaders to follow certain agreed principles that national security specialists hidden within the government and unaccountable have established for weaker leaders to guide them in their policy behavior. Having said that, I think it is a somewhat hopeful sign that Trump seems to be creating a certain distance between what Israel wants to have done in the region and what his policies and initiatives are doing. And this deliberate failure to visit Israel during his first Middle Eastern trip is certainly symbolically and possibly substantively a very significant act. Also, his earlier ceasefire with the Houthis was something that certainly seemed to go against the preferences of the Netanyahu government in Israel, as well as supposedly he vetoed the idea of an attack on Iran without trying to find a diplomatic solution. And lifted the sanctions on Syria, all of which suggests a more independent U.S. role in the region that is oriented to a greater degree to the Arab world than exclusively deferential to Israel and what Israel hopes to achieve in the region in this period. And so in that sense, I think one should give these Trump initiatives the benefit of the doubt and welcome this kind of balancing of the relationship with Israel and the relationship with the Arab world in general and the negotiated normalization with Iran. All of those things are a little bit precarious, but at least one should, given the alternative, one should be encouraging these kind of initiatives. Having said this, the one thing that is rather bizarre is the proposal that the U.S. take over Gaza in some form and supervise the reconstruction and have no role for the Palestinians except either to leave or to stay in a subjugated role as victimized in their own country, their own homeland, and that the ethical and political character of that proposal seems to be the least trustworthy dimension of what Trump seems to be hoping to achieve. Since he's very transactional and seeks always to be making deals, one assumes that even this proposal is a way of getting counter proposals generated, maybe arriving at something that is viable. But there's not too much evidence to be encouraging on that front, as distinct from the earlier comments that I made.
And Netanyahu has come out this week and he said that over the next few days, you're going to see something that you never could have imagined. We're going to go into Gaza with full force. That seems to run contrary to even Donald Trump's plan to take over Gaza by the U.S.'s own might, and also his pleas as of this week to get aid and food into Gaza. What do you think is the nature of this contradiction, and what do you expect to see happen?
I don't. I'm not sure I can, in good conscience, say that I have clear expectations because these leaders are so opportunistic in one way and unpredictable in another way. Now, whether this is a posturing by Netanyahu or he really intends to carry this exterminationist policy in Gaza to its final outcome of starving the population and decimating what's left of the country and occupying part of it in opposition to what the regional governments want and what the UN wants and what public opinion wants. Israel has suffered already enormous reputational losses. It has prevailed, obviously, militarily, but it had very little opposition. It wasn't a victory it should be proud of on the battlefield, but on the political battlefield, it's lost ground. It's viewed in a very hostile way in large parts of the world, and there's signs that many countries don't want to have positive relations with Israel in the future. So they had, in the first Trump presidency, the so-called Abraham Accords normalized relations with several of the Arab governments over the heads of the Arab people who are very pro-Palestinian. Mm-hmm. And so you have that complexity of a public that is in virtually total solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, and the governments that are afraid of popular movements and regard Hamas as more dangerous to their stability than Israel is. So you have that potential instability in the neighboring countries, and how that plays out in this period is very difficult to predict. There's no doubt that Trump's diplomacy has stirred things up, but whether that's going to work beneficially toward inhibiting Israel, or whether Israel feels that it has to act quickly and decisively at this last stage, and then try to reconcile with Washington. It's very hard to know, and public opinion in the U.S., as you undoubtedly know, has shifted quite a bit toward favoring a more balanced approach by the U.S. to the region, and has even gone to the extent of favoring a situation where both Israel and Iran give up their nuclear programs. And a large proportion of the Americans in this poll, the most recent reliable poll that I've seen, favor that outcome to a situation where either Iran is attacked or only Israel keeps a nuclear weapons capability.
A lot of people online think that this is all a ruse, it's all a show, that Trump doesn't actually have bad blood with Netanyahu. That could be, but as you mentioned in your first answer, there's been several things that have happened over the past week that have led me, at least, to believe that there is something somewhat serious, at least, that is getting in between them. Whether it's a war or just a tender familial dispute is, I guess, yet to be seen. But you had, as you mentioned, the dropping of sanctions on Syria. You had the peace deal with Yemen. You had Eden Alexander, the American-Israeli hostage, being freed by the Trump administration and refusing to meet with Netanyahu, and several other things that we've discussed. Do you think it's fair to say that this is real, that that this might just be in terms of modern history, a historic low in terms of U.S.-Israeli relations?
Well, as I've tried to emphasize, it's very hard to generalize about Trump's initiatives, and whether he's just trying to get some sort of leverage in the relationship with Israel. And because Israel was really pushing the U.S. around during the Biden years. And I think that was, from almost any point of view, a very unhealthy kind of relationship for the U.S. to find itself really the subordinate party in this kind of bilateral connection with Israel, where it was the dominant global actor post-Cold War. So you had this kind of anomaly that Israel was controlling policy in the Middle East at the expense of the U.S. reputation as a global responsible leader. And Biden seemed to be clueless as to how to project independent U.S. interests in a stable region, not a region that risked a backlash against Israel's attacks on all kinds of individuals and countries and movements beyond its borders. And it created a very bad impression in much of the world that the U.S. didn't quite know what it was doing in this important energy-rich area, and that it looked to Netanyahu and Israel for leadership, and I think Trump has broken that Biden kind of self neutralization, so to speak, and I think it's a period of considerable uncertainty, and the important attitude is less one of anticipating the future than encouraging a more constructive behavior that will lead to a more hopeful and better future that takes some account of the Palestinian ordeal, which has received very little attention or acknowledgement from the Trump administration, and that's not only a denial of fundamental human rights, but it's also a very cruel and insensitive approach to a people that have been subjected to 19 months of what many people, including myself, regard as a genocidal assault by Israel. And it's something that the eyes and ears of the world have been exposed to in real time, which has never happened before, including in the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, which was only known in retrospect and when the death camps were liberated after World War II, at the end of World War II, and all the other genocides are basically reconstructed after the events. This was one that was in keeping with the the media skills of the digital age, was really reported in real time. And it's not surprising that Israel attacked and targeted journalists as never before. More journalists died in Gaza than the whole of World War II, which is kind of amazing. And they targeted UN people, and the UN, these shelters for civilians. I mean, it deserves some greater attention to the victims of these policies, as well as to trying to create a stable future for the region.
Mm-hmm. for, over a year, Israel told us that the military operation inside of Gaza had two goals: to eradicate Hamas and to get the hostages back. That's what they said. They failed at both of those goals. Do you think anything could change with regard to achieving those goals if, in fact, they decide to continue the genocide by, quote unquote, sending the full force into Gaza in the coming days?
Well, first of all, I think that Israel never intended those objectives to be its primary goals. Its primary goal was ethnic cleansing, and to reshape the relationship with Gaza, but even more importantly, to allow the settler vision of the West Bank to prevail. And the whole Netanyahu government policy, from the time it came to control the government at the beginning of 2023, several months, 10 months before October 7th, was to greenlight this settler violence on the West Bank and to provoke in different ways Hamas and the Gaza population. And one of the reasons for the widespread misperception, which I feel the mainstream media contributed to, was to completely decontextualize what happened on October 7th, to not examine what Israel had done to the people of Gaza in terms of a blockade that had been established in 2007 and greatly restricted either the economic capability of Gaza to have a productive economy, but also restricting its imports in punitive ways, having nothing to do with security. Things like chocolate and pasta and all kinds of other things that were directed to making the life of the people of Gaza as intolerable as possible as a preparation for ethnic cleansing. And what October 7th provided was a pretext for carrying out this underlying image of the way to finally fulfill the objectives of the Zionist project, which was to control the whole of mandated Palestine and get rid of the idea that these occupied parts of Palestine were the basis of a Palestinian state. They wanted to destroy that conception of a Palestinian state and to secure as much sovereign control over Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem as they could. That, in my view, is the primary objective. Whether they thought they could do the two that you mentioned, I think they deliberately deprioritized the return of the hostages, and they did want to destroy Hamas, but they early on recognized that was a probably unattainable goal, even with the pursuit of this unlimited violence in a tiny area. You know, it's one of the most crowded places in the world. And having been there, it's hard to imagine that the that the people could have endured this degree of violence over such a long period of time. And one has to assume that the entire population is somewhat, the surviving population is somewhat traumatized and probably in a condition of what one might call mental impairment or disorientation after such an experience. So it's hard to know. And the only other thing I would mention is that there are well substantiated grounds for thinking that Netanyahu was informed and warned about the impending October 7th attack. The U.S. government, more than a year prior to the attack, conveyed a very detailed warning, as did Egyptian intelligence, and I'm sure their own surveillance capabilities, which are very formidable, must have had some advanced knowledge of such a elaborate undertaking as occurred on October 7th. So one has to take two things into account. What was Israel really after in launching this kind of prolonged attack on Gaza? And secondly, how the nature of October 7th was misrepresented by being so totally decontextualized. Mm-hmm. Without those two elements, I think it's very hard to appreciate what's happened. Having said that, I think there is a lot of reason to believe that there was a fundamental miscalculation by Netanyahu, that military capabilities, given this unrestricted mission, would be able to substantially annihilate Hamas. But as often happened in the U.S. interventions, it turned out that military superiority often doesn't attain political goals. Vietnam being the most prominent example, where the U.S. was in total of military control of air, sea, and land, and yet lost the war in a very real sense. The political outcome was the exact reverse of why it had intervened in the first place. Mm-hmm. And there's a failure to learn these lessons because the private sector gained so much from involvement of a military character in these overseas undertakings. And that often is also left out of conventional analysis, that the arms industry, what Eisenhower warned about decades ago, the military-industrial complex, wants a world of security threats and interventionary responses because it's very profitable and sustains a peacetime, very high military budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully Trump learns this week that peace And diplomacy can also be very profitable, as we've seen with these massive investments from Qatar, 200 billion, Saudi Arabia, 600 billion, and probably more coming in the future if things go well. But Professor Richard Falk, thank you so much for your time today, for your insightful analysis and your career of just exposing the truth and documenting the facts. And I hope to speak again with you sometime in the future. It was a great pleasure.
Good. My pleasure also. And thank you for the conversation. And I was glad to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you.